focus, meaning, and identity. My wife and I love going to the parade of homes every year. My wife being an interior designer, she loves seeing the extravagant designs, the different creative expressions, all of that. I mentioned to a friend this week that we had been going and asked if he had checked out any of the homes, and he said no, because I know that if I go, then all of a sudden I will start wanting. I thought that was really, really interesting because so often when we think of in scripture the phrase lust of the eyes, right? We tend to think sexual. And obviously that's a huge part of it. But so often what we focus on and then ascribe meaning to, whether consciously or not, we ultimately turn into part of our identity. So a few examples. After seeing a couple of Ferraris drive by several years ago, one night I was feeling a little bit discouraged and I decided to pull up YouTube videos of Ferraris and other supercars revving their engines. And all of a sudden, within one night, I started realizing I really want one. Now, until I allowed myself to focus on those sports cars, I couldn't care less. I'm not a car guy. I barely know how to conduct an oil change on my Honda Passport. I'm not a car guy. But because I was focusing on it, it then gained meaning. Now, the meaning in my mind was something to the tune of, I have arrived, or it's a status symbol that I was craving because in that season, I was feeling a sense of confusion as to where I wanted to go in my life. And even though I was making good money, I knew I didn't want to be on that path for too long. So there was a level of aspiration, there was a level of desire. Now, thankfully, that meaning and that focus didn't stick around for all that long. The reality is we all have things that if we focus on them too much, will gain unhealthy ground in our heart, our mind, our affection, and ultimately our identity. Now, another one is sports, right? So I played sports growing up, but I didn't really watch a whole lot of sports. It wasn't important to me. I would rather be outside playing kickball or whatever. However, I noticed when it came time for March Madness in the software world, where we would have our picks, or March Madness where we would all have our picks, I started getting much more emotionally invested because it had deeper meaning. It was camaraderie, it was friendship, it was competition. And so for that season, it became much more important to me. Now, it didn't get to a level of identity, but it still consumed more of my time. And I felt firsthand my capacity to, if I continued allowing myself to focus on watching sports, I absolutely could become addicted to it and see it as part of my identity. So often we craft identities without even realizing it. So often it starts out with the lust of our eyes, not necessarily sexual, though that again can be part of it, but we focus on things that are not God, are not of God, and then we focus on them so much that they balloon in importance. They start developing meaning unto themselves. Now, having friendships that talk about sports or they talk about sport cars, that's not necessarily a bad thing when kept in check. Now, we all have areas of personal vulnerability. Mine, for example, for a long time was pornography. And to this day, I still have different safeguards set up, even though I haven't actually struggled with pornography in a long time. But I have them set up because I know that I am vulnerable. I know that I am susceptible to that. From my experience, unless it's explicitly bad like pornography, most people are blind to the extent to which their hobbies, their affections, the things that they focus on are becoming part of their identity. Now, a fascinating definition of addiction is the gradual narrowing of things that bring you joy. And I personally have experienced this. I decided I was going to buy an open world video game called Skyrim, and I very quickly became full-blown addicted. Now, are videos bad objectively? No, not necessarily. But for me, I went from focusing on it while playing it to meaning, which manifested itself as numbing. It was an escape from the pain that I was in, to identity/addiction very quickly. And by that, I mean, I wasn't able to, in that season, enjoy conversations with my wife or even be emotionally present. I no longer enjoyed reading or other hobbies or personal growth. It narrowed the things that I found joy in because it started subsuming more of my identity. In essence, we can view addiction as anything that tries to fill the void of our identity that is not of God. Whether that's pornography, whether that's social media, whether that's watching college sports or anything. And so my encouragement to you is be mindful of what you focus on, because they will become a part of your perceived identity. Whether for the positive, such as growing in your relationship with God, becoming more like God, seeking to further his kingdom through the use of your time, your talent, your treasures, or whether you're filling the void of your identity with more addictive things, things that are idols, things that are not necessarily of God, yet have risen to an unhealthy level of importance and meaning in your life. Now, the question really should be asked, why? Why is it bad if, whether it's video games or sports or hunting or fill in the blank, why is it a problem if I enjoy a certain thing too much? Like, didn't God create everything, and doesn't God want us to enjoy his gifts? And the answer is yes, but God has called us to love him first and foremost. And God has called our primary mission in this world to be serving him. And so if our affections are rising for anything, good or bad, to the level of replacing him, or keeping us from finding or living into God's calling in our life, it is robbing us of the potential that God has given us. It is robbing us of God using us to further his kingdom. And ultimately, it leads to a shallow existence. God has made us for so much more than the superficial fascinations of the day or of the week. And this is something that I constantly am fighting against, and I hope that you will too. Because if we don't monitor the things that we focus on, that develop meaning in our lives, they will ultimately become part of our identity, for better or for worse, and they will shape who we become. That's part of why God has called us to be in community, not just have friendships, but have friendships that will call us out when our hearts, our minds, our affections start to sway. Who do you have in your life who would be willing to have the courage to call you out, call you to something higher? One of my favorite words, if not my favorite word in the English language, is the word encourage. So often we think of the word encourage as to say something nice, and that's not at all what it's about. The word can be split into two words, en, which is like to give, to enable, and courage. Encouragement is more about giving someone the courage they need in order to do what is best for them, in order to do what God has called them to do. My friends, my encouragement to you would be that you do an audit of your life. What are you giving too much focus on? What is developing meaning that you may or may not be aware of? And is anything crossing the threshold of your perceived identity or even addiction level? And are there changes that need to be made? Are you living into the full potential that God has given you? Are you allowing God's Spirit to sanctify you? This is an ongoing process, and I'm finding myself on a very regular basis cutting things out because there is so much more that God has called us as believers to live for. So often we think of them as responsibilities. I just see them as opportunities. Things like loving my wife like Christ loves the church. Things like raising my child in the way that he should go. Things like serving the men within the ministry, helping them to see God in the midst of their pain and help them find freedom from addiction. Like helping marriages that were at the end of their rope, like Sarah and mine was, find hope and healing. The thing is, when we focus on the things that don't matter eternally, we lose the ability to see what God is calling us to do. And it's only when we sit in the quiet that we can hear God's voice for what he is calling us to do next. If we are husbands, but we are not loving our wife like Christ loves the church, we are not stewarding the gifts that God has given us. So why would he give us more? The same thing with kids. It's the same thing with every opportunity that God has for us. How are you stewarding the gifts that God has given you? How are you stewarding the calling that God has given you? If you don't feel like you have a calling on your life, is that because you're numbing out? Is it because you're focusing on the things that are serving as distractions, that if you spent enough time weaning yourself off of the temporary highs of those things and allowed yourself to be still and know God, would God give you more clarity? I encourage you to sit with that for a bit. My friends, I know there is a lot here, and I hope you see it as an encouragement, because I want you to be consciously aware of how your decisions lead to your identity, which lead to your future. My hope is that through raising your awareness, you'll be more intentional, and that through the intentionality, God will work mightily in and through you.